Canada is one of the largest and most resource-rich countries in the world, standing as an independent nation since 1867. The idea of Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States has been a topic of speculation for decades. While this scenario is highly unlikely, imagining the consequences of such a shift raises fascinating questions. The political, economic, and cultural impacts of Canada joining the US would be enormous. One of the first challenges would be the legal process required to merge two sovereign nations. The United States Constitution does not have a direct process for annexing an entire independent country. Canada would need to dissolve its government and formally apply for statehood, which would require overwhelming public support. Most Canadians take great pride in their national identity and are unlikely to favor becoming part of the US. However, if such a merger were to happen, it would instantly make the United States the largest country in the world. The addition of Canada's landmass would increase US territory by nearly 40%, stretching from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. This would dramatically shift the global balance of power, giving the US unparalleled access to natural resources. Canada's vast reserves of oil, freshwater, timber, and minerals would become assets controlled by Washington. The economic implications would be enormous, with Canada's industries fully integrating into the US economy. Trade between the two nations is already strong, with Canada being the United States' largest trading partner. By becoming a US state, Canadian businesses would gain even more access to American markets. The financial benefits, however, would come with significant political and cultural changes. Canada's government, based on a parliamentary system, would be completely replaced by the US federal system. Canadians would have to accept the US Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Supreme Court rulings. Gun laws, which are much stricter in Canada, would likely become a contentious issue. Healthcare would also be a major point of concern, as Canada's universal healthcare system would be replaced by the US model. Many Canadians would likely resist losing their publicly funded medical care in exchange for privatized healthcare. Taxes would be another major change, as Canada has higher tax rates to fund social programs. If Canada became a US state, federal policies on education, crime, and the environment would shift dramatically. The influence of American politics, including issues like abortion rights and corporate lobbying, would reshape Canadian society. The cultural differences between the two nations could create tension as they merge into a single political entity. Canadians are known for valuing multiculturalism, social welfare, and a more reserved approach to global politics. The US tends to have a more aggressive foreign policy, which could conflict with Canada's historical stance on diplomacy. Americanization of Canadian media, sports, and public holidays would also become inevitable. Newly designated Canadian states would have to accept American-style governance and political divisions. English and French are both official languages in Canada, but US states operate primarily in English. Quebec, which has a strong French-speaking identity, would likely resist becoming part of the United States. Many Quebecers might even push for independence rather than join an American-led system. The process of dividing Canada into multiple states would create debates over representation in Congress. Would Canada remain one large state, or would it be divided into multiple states based on provinces? If divided, Canada could add 10 or more states to the US, completely reshaping the Senate and Electoral College. This would drastically alter US elections, giving former Canadian states significant political influence. The shift in demographics could also change political party dynamics across North America. Canada leans politically liberal compared to the US, which could impact policies on climate change, gun control, and healthcare. With a population of around 40 million, Canada would bring in new voters who could reshape national elections. International relations would also be affected, as Canada's global reputation is different from that of the United States. Canada is widely respected for its neutrality and diplomacy, whereas the US has been involved in numerous conflicts. If Canada became a US state, it would be forced to take a stronger stance on military actions and global alliances. Canada's existing treaties, trade agreements, and foreign policy commitments would all be rewritten. Many world leaders might view the annexation as a US power move rather than a mutual decision. Canada's military, which is relatively small compared to the US armed forces, would be absorbed into American defense programs. Canadian citizens would automatically become US citizens, changing their rights, responsibilities, and travel freedoms. Some Canadians might welcome the economic boost of becoming part of the world's largest economy. Others would likely resist, fearing the loss of their national identity and the values that define Canada. Cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal would become major American metropolitan centers overnight. This could lead to population growth and increased investment, but also cultural tensions and policy conflicts. The Americanization of Canadian sports would also be a significant cultural shift. The NHL is deeply embedded in Canadian culture, but new sports influences like American football might rise. Canada's beloved traditions, from poutine to hockey rivalries, could be absorbed into American branding. Public services, police forces, and education systems would all undergo dramatic restructuring. Many Canadians might choose to leave rather than adapt to the new American way of life. Even the country's currency would disappear, as the US dollar would become the official currency in Canada. Iconic symbols of Canadian sovereignty, like the maple leaf flag and national anthem, would become history. Over time, younger generations might grow up identifying more with American culture than traditional Canadian values. Ultimately, whether this scenario would be beneficial or disastrous depends on one's perspective. From an economic standpoint, access to larger markets and resources could be an advantage. From a political and cultural standpoint, the loss of Canadian sovereignty would be a profound change. The reality is that Canada becoming the 51st state is incredibly unlikely, given its strong national pride. Public opposition in Canada would likely make any attempt at annexation politically impossible. Most Americans also see Canada as a respected neighbor rather than a potential state. While the two countries share deep ties, their differences are what make each nation unique. Canada and the US have long coexisted as allies, with strong trade agreements and military partnerships. Instead of merging into one entity, both countries are more likely to continue working together as sovereign nations. For now, the idea of Canada as the 51st state remains nothing more than a political and historical what-if scenario. Even if the borders between them blur economically and culturally, Canada will always stand as its own nation. No matter how closely linked, Canada and the US will likely remain two distinct countries for the foreseeable future.